ingat makan. So as I promised before, maybe a week or two ago, I would make a phonology video for verbs in Rumsen. So I made another video for nouns in Rumsen and the phonology for that. So if you haven't seen that video, I would say watch that, but specifically the first 5 to 10 minutes of it, because that is where I explain basic definitions and the basic process for phonology. So you might not understand some things in this video if you don't know things like what an underlying form is and what a surface form is. So in Rumsen, this video will mainly focus on finding the infinitive form of a verb. So the infinitive form is kind of like the quote-unquote plain verb, or what you would find in a dictionary. So if you want to find like the word for to see, you will look that up in the dictionary, and the form that comes up in the dictionary, that is the infinitive form, to blank. So here are just some examples of some infinitive forms of a couple of verbs. So here we see ayyew, which means to see, pakkar, which means to be starry, and en, to write, wat, to come, nitsil, to crouch down, and ittim, to get up. So these are all surface forms. This is the form of the verb that you see in the language in action. So this is what will come up when you look up this word in the dictionary, if there is one that exists. But as I said before, in Rumsen, everything has an underlying form, which is kind of like a form of the word that is hidden, that is under the surface. So as I can see here, the infinitive form, like for ayyew, to see, in the square brackets, that is the underlying form, ayyew. So this is the form of the verb that is hidden. You don't see just ayyew by itself ever in the language, but when you add certain morphemes or suffixes, affixes, you will see that this form actually pops up. So if we look at, for example, ayyew, to look at oneself, that is, ayyew exists in this form of the word. So as we can see here, pakkar, the underlying form is pakra. So starry is pakracht, like a starry night. Enne is the underlying form, so ennenin, which means wrote. Wate becomes waten, which means like came, like they came or something. Nitsli becomes nitslicht, crouched, and itma becomes itmak, to get up. So you will never see things like ayyew, pakra, enne, wate, nitsli, or itma by itself in the language ever, because these are hidden. But if you add certain affixes, it changes. So let's talk about some of the phonological rules. So how exactly do we go from ayyew to ayyew? There are certain processes that make you determine this. So the first rule that I came up with is metathesis. Metathesis basically is when you switch the place of sounds in a word. So this happens sometimes in English. Like, for example, the word for ask goes from ask to ax. You switch the S and the K. You know, it's sometimes a lot of people will say I asked him, not I asked him. So this is metathesis. So this is the rule. It looks really complicated, but I'll explain it. If a sonorant consonant comes before a vowel at the end of a word, you switch their places. So specifically, a short sonorant consonant, if it's short, then you will switch it. So what is a sonorant? I just want to go over that. That is these consonants at the bottom. M, N, R, R, Y, L, W. So if these consonants come before a vowel at the end of a word and they are short, then you switch them. So let's look at an example. Let's look at ayyew, which is the underlying form for to see ayyew. So is there a sonorant to the left of a vowel? Yes. W is next to E at the end of a word. So W is a sonorant. It's in this list. So what happens? You have to switch them. So ayyew becomes ayyew. So this is the first step that has to happen. The next step is called gemination. So a geminate basically is like a long consonant or like a double consonant, like two M's next to each other, two K's or two Y's, whatever. So gemination is when you make a consonant double or longer. So this rule that I wrote out here is really complicated. But basically what it's saying is you make a consonant longer if the word is CV-CV, which means consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. So the thing is, Rumsen does not like this form. It does not like CV-CV. It likes CV-CCV. So if you see a word that has CV-CV, you have to double that middle consonant. So it becomes compatible with the language. Rumsen just doesn't like CV-CV. There isn't a particular reason why, it just doesn't like it. So it makes the middle consonant double. So that's why before, when we did metathesis, we switched the W and the E. It becomes ayyew. Now the thing is, you will never see this word pop up in Rumsen because Rumsen, again, does not like this form. So what happens to happen? You make the middle consonant double. You make the Y double. So I wrote out here what the word comes into. So as we can see, ayyew. So the apostrophe AYEW, CV. So Rumsen again does not like this kind of structure. So you make that middle C, the second C, double. So now when we double that Y, it's compatible. CV, apostrophe AYYE. Now this form is compatible. So that is the second thing that has to take place. Now, a fun fact, Mutsun, which is closely related to Rumsen, it is okay with CV. So that's why Mutsun has, like, the word for rat is hire, and Rumsen is hirrech. So again, it's also a stress thing. Stress is never on the last syllable in Rumsen, it's always on the second to last syllable. So because CV exists in Mutsun, the stress is on the second syllable, on the last syllable. So hire is Mutsun. Rumsen, of course, does not like that, so it becomes hirrech. Same thing with words like rock. In Mutsun, it's irek. Rumsen, it's irrek. You switch that stress, and you switch that stress to the second to last syllable if you double the middle consonant. So lastly, there's a third rule called word final deletion. So that's just when you delete the last vowel. If there is a vowel at the end of a word, you delete it. So this is why for other underlying forms like wate in the word to come, in the surface form becomes wat. So there's no E. You could just delete the E. But for verbs that went through metathesis and gemination, like ayyew does not have a vowel at the end. It has a W, a consonant. So this rule doesn't even apply. So this all seems really confusing explaining to it like this, but let's explain it to you through a graph so you can see this happen in action. So there's the word pakar, wat, and nitsil and itin. You know, these are just like the other verbs that I introduced. We'll see how it becomes the word at the end, the surface form. So I have here in the slashes. The slashes show the underlying form. These are the hidden form of the verb. So let's just go through each one. So we see the word for to be starry, like a starry night or something. So let's see here, metathesis happens first. Let's check that. So is there a sonorant, a short sonorant before a vowel at the end of a word? Yes. R is a sonorant, and it is right before a vowel at the end of a word, A. So you have to switch the R and the A, so it becomes pakar. Again, this word does not exist in Rumsen, we're not there yet. So let's look at gemination now. So let's check. Is it CV? Yes. So CV is right there. PAKA, that is CV. and Rumsen does not like it, so you have to double that second consonant. You double the K. So now it becomes pakkar instead of pakkar. I don't even know how to say that, pakkar, because this word doesn't exist. So now we get the final form of the word. And let's check that third rule, word final vowel deletion. There is no vowel, this rule doesn't even apply. So this is how you get pakkar. Pakkar. Now let's look at what, to come. Kind of alluded to this earlier, but as you can see, the underlying form has an E at the end. So let's just check metathesis. Is there a sonorant before a word at the end of, before a vowel at the end of a word? So no, there's TE, but T is not a sonorant. It's considered a stop. Remember, a sonorant is something like M, N, L, R's, Y's, W's, things like that. So T, that is not a sonorant. So this rule doesn't even apply. Again, gemination. Is there CVCV? No, there is CVVCV. So there is no CVCV. This rule doesn't even apply. And lastly, word final vowel deletion. Yes, there is a vowel. There is that E. So now it becomes what. That is how you get to come. What. So let's look at to write. N. So let's look at metathesis. Is there a short sonorant before a vowel? So this is where it gets a little tricky. So there is NE at the end. N is a sonorant, and it is right before a vowel, but it is long. Remember, we only switch it if it is a short consonant. So there are two N's. So this is a long N technically. N. So this rule does not apply. Again, gemination. Usually gemination, we only have to use that rule if the metathesis rule applies, and it did not. So gemination, we don't have to worry about that. It's CVCCV already. So lastly, there is the vowel at the end. That's the E. You take off that second E. Now that's how you get N. Now let's look at nitsil. So I assume you're getting the hang of this already. So let's just go over everything. So metathesis. Yes, there is an LI. LI. So you switch that. Now it becomes a nitsil. Now I want to point out that the TS is written as two separate consonants, but technically this is considered one phoneme in Rumsen. It's considered one sound. So even though written it's two consonants, technically in the language it is considered one sound. Nitsil. Nitsil. So just want to point out if that might be a little confusing. But here, let's look at gemination. Yes, it becomes CVCV. NITSI. So now we have to just double that second C, which is the T. Now, again, this is written a little confusingly, but the TTS, that is considered double T. So nitsil. It's double T, in case that was a little confusing. So again, there is no vowel at the end of the word. It's an L. That's the last consonant. So now it becomes nitsil. Nitsil. So last but not least, let's look at to get up, itim. So this is a little tricky because we'll go over it, but metathesis, yes, that applies. There is an MA. The M is short, so you switch it. Itam. Again, not a word. So gemination occurs because there is now apostrophe ITA. So that is CVCV. Ita. So that can't happen. So now it becomes itam. So if you look at the bottom, the surface form is actually itim. So the reason for that is because itim is irregular. So the reason why there's no A in it is just because that's just how the verb goes. There's no really phonological explanation. These rules don't really address that. But just in case that was a little confusing, yes, it is because this word is irregular. Now let's introduce some morphological rules. So morphology basically means things like suffixes, affixes, prefixes, things like this. So let's look at just a couple, 5 of them. So the participle one, you add an xt. So participle means like if you want to make into an adjective, like for example, there, if you have the verb to be heavy, and now you want to make it into a participle. Now the participle form is just heavy. So the next morphological rule is reflexive. So you just suffix a p at the end. So again, past tense, you just suffix an n. Plural command, if you want to address multiple people for a command, it's just the retroflex t, like the k sound at the end of a word. And reciprocal means something like each other, like we kiss each other, we hug each other. You put an m at the end. So let's look at this in a derivation. Now, every time we have morphology in a derivation, the morphological rule always comes before the phonological rule. It always comes before. So if we look here, I just added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes. So reflexive, participle, past tense, reciprocal, and plural command, those are all the morphological rules. And underneath that are the 3 phonological rules that we made: metathesis, gemination, and word final vowel deletion. So let's go through each one of them. So remember, we always start off with the underlying form, the hidden form. We always start off with that. So let's look at how we made ayyew, to look at yourself. Ayyew. So we have ayyew, and let's see which morphological rule applies. We want the reflexive, so we just add a p, ayyew. Now, skip the rest of the morphological rules, because we don't want those forms, those grammatical forms. We only want the reflexive. Now, if you look metathesis, again, that doesn't apply because there's an EP at the end. So we need a sonorant before a vowel. It's not even ending in a vowel this time. It's ending in a consonant. We don't need gemination. There's no CVCV. And we don't need word final vowel deletion because there's a P. So ayyew just becomes the surface form, ayyew. So we only need one change. So if you look through all these, what you notice is that when you have a morphological rule applied, like you want to make a grammatical form, like starry, or came, to paint on each other, crouched, get up, things like these, grammatical forms, you really just need to add the morphological suffix onto the underlying form, and you have the word. So at the second to last column, I put pakkar, how we got pakkar before in the derivation before this one. I just showed you the process that needs to happen to go from pakra to pakkar. Just as a comparison with the other forms. You can compare that with pakracht, starry. So, just looking at this, usually if you want to make a grammatical form, like some kind of tense, some kind of participle form, a command, you just need one suffix. You need an affix onto the underlying form, and you got it. So that is why getting the infinitive form is a little bit more difficult, because you need to do more process. But the thing is, if you're, studying Rumsen, you don't actually need to know these phonological rules. You probably don't even need to remember the exact details. You will just pick it up eventually by yourself. You don't need to know the nitty-gritty linguistic things with it. So if you see a word, let me think of a word. So yes, if you come across the word gauwnacht for married, or it literally means to have a wife. So if you come across the word gauwnacht, you can think what is the infinitive form? You can just take off the the xt at the end. Now all you have is gauwna. But of course, you know that in Rumsen, you cannot end a word with a vowel usually. There are exceptions like pronouns, names, sometimes numbers. Those are the exceptions, but usually for a verb, you never ever have a vowel at the end of a word. So you would get gauna, but you're kind of like, so let's delete the a, gaun. But that sounds a little weird, it sounds a little strange to say. So you kind of can guess what the infinitive is, which is gawan. Gawan, to have a wife. Gawan. And it's you just do the mental gymnastics of flipping around the sounds and doubling the consonant, and you got it. So yes, this process likely occurs because if you, for example, if we look at pakkar, to be starry, if you first delete the vowel at the end of a word, so with the underlying form, if you delete the a at pakra, it just becomes pakr. And that's, of course, hard to say, pakr. So that is why this process has to happen of flipping it around. Pakkar. You keep the a, but also the stress is on the on the second to last syllable. So this is the process that needs to happen. Over time, you'll just pick up on it. But if you were more interested with the phonology and the linguistics of it, these are the rules. I just wanted to put a disclaimer that I am not an expert in phonology. I'm not a special phonologist. I'm sure that some of my rules were written a little bit, inaccurately. You could tweak it around, and as an expert probably knows better how to write some of these rules. But this is basically how I figured it out. Personally, it's been a while since I took phonology, but these are the basic rules. And this is the process that needs to happen to get a verb. Shururu.